Everyone, and welcome to the first session on Python. We got through all the intro computer stuff and now we're finally into Python programming. So let's kind of start off where we did last time, which is how we start our Jupyter Notebook. So I open my terminal and then I'm going to run the Jupyter Notebook command from my home directory. It's going to open up the um, Jupyter Notebook kind of directory screen. I go to my documents, Python tutorials, and I'll make a new notebook. And I'll call this one, intro, or I guess Python video 1. Okay, and now the place where I'm doing this course at, they've kind of built in a Jupyter Notebook into their kind of curriculum screen. So here's kind of what it looks like on their screen. You can see code over here on the right hand side. This should work similarly to how the Jupyter Notebook works. So I put some Python code there and then I hit Shift Enter and it'll run it. Just like I can over here. So if you're doing this at home, you can just open your Jupyter Notebook and print what I have on the screen here. It's exactly what they had in the other video, and we're on the same page. So what they're doing for their very first part of this program is they're teaching you how to print something to the console window. Okay, so you can note in my terminal over here I have a whole bunch of text, and that text is all generated through print statements. And so what it's saying is the way you do that is you just run this print with a parenthesis, quote, and then whatever you want to be outputted to the screen. And I mean, normally when you learn programming, the first thing you're going to do is a hello world program. And so the thing in the text should say hello world. But for this, it's saying, okay, the way you do it is they want you to print hooray and then click run. So if I do print hooray and then hit Shift Enter, let's see, it's probably because I had that notification open. If I just hit play there, it will start running, and then yeah, you see the result here, it printed hooray to the window. So if I do that in the Jupyter Notebook, I do print hooray and I do Shift Enter, boom, it printed hooray to the Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so that's the first lesson, is how you print something to the screen. And so it didn't have to be hooray there. So if I go back to this notebook and I print, hello world, this is normally what a intro programming class would teach you, is print that to the so the computer is speaking to you. It's saying, hey, what's up, So that is the very first lesson. That's pretty easy. You're using a function called print, and you're putting the parameter as hooray, and that prints it to the screen. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so now it's going to go more in depth in what the print function actually does. It says functions in Python will become your best friends. You'll need to know their names so you can call them when needed. In Python, the print command is responsible for data output on the screen. Read and remember. Print is a function, meaning that a built-in mini program to perform a specific action in Python. The purpose of the print function is to output data, or print it to the screen in programming jargon. The function's name is followed by arguments or parameters, the data that the function must process in parentheses. They indicate that arguments are passed and the function accepts them. When we write the name of a function complete with arguments, we call the function. So the act of adding two parentheses at the end of the function is calling the function. The use of an actual function is referred to as the call. So yeah, when you say print and you add the parentheses, you're calling the function, okay? In our example, the argument is the read and remember text. Yeah, so the parameter or the argument here is read and remember, whatever's in quotes. So it was hooray on the last one. It's hello world on the last one. Please note that the text in Python must be put in quotation marks, but that it will be printed on the screen without quotation marks. So what's interesting about Python too is you can use either double quotes or single quotes. So let's see if it says print the research title on the screen. Do that, call the print function. Okay. Let's exit out of that. So if I do shift return, or I guess since I'm using Mac, it wants me to use this play button, but like I said, it's shift and return for you. So it'll print that to the screen. Let's see if I use double quotes, it should be the exact same thing in Python. And so same thing here. This is pretty much the exact same thing that we already did. I think it just went more in depth into explaining it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about numbers. So the text we just wrote is a program source code. It is often referred to as a program or code. This is a set of instructions. The computer follows them if the program is written in a language that it understands, in this case, for example, Python. Our interactive platform, the program will run when you click the run button. Yep. Now that we have the title of our research, it's time to make some calculations. Python can work with numbers like a regular calculator. For example, let's compute how many people have studied English as a foreign language. A total of 1,121 million people speak English. 378.2 million of them have it as their native language. Here's what we get. Print 1121 minus 378.2. And that prints the result, which is 742.8. You can see that nearly 743 million people have learned English from scratch. Remember that Python uses a period as a decimal separator. In this program, minus is not just a sign, but a programming language command or operator. Python knows other operators besides subtraction. In Python, you use plus for addition, minus for subtraction, star for multiplication, and slash for division. Arithmetic operators are usually separated by spaces to make the code easier to read. Yeah, so you don't, this is just good programming practices versus bad programming practices. To make it easier to read, you put spaces, because if you get all this stuff together, it looks clunky and gross. Python performs multiplication division first, followed by addition and subtraction. You can artificially change the order of operations by using parentheses. So this is just like PEMDAS you might have learned in your algebra class, right? And actually they don't even mention exponentization. You know, taking something to the power 2 or taking something to the power 3. That actually can occur before even multiplication. But yeah, you use parentheses, then to the power of, and then multiplication and division, and then addition and subtraction. So this shows you how it's calculated. And then for this instruction, they want us to figure out the fraction by dividing the number of speakers by the planet's population. So in the print statement we had before, this is actually going against what they said earlier. They wanted you to have a space there, right? So if I print 1121 divided by 7539 and hit play, it'll print the decimal form here. And you'll notice that a computer, when it does the division, it'll actually put a lot of decimal places at the end of it. And that's based off that 64-bit thing I was talking about. You have 64 bits to represent a number, and that 64-bit can get you a high precision or amount of decimal places for your number. So if you want to, cut some of that off, we'll learn about rounding in the future, I bet. So if you're doing that here, I'll just do another example here. We can do what's 2 plus 2, because I did that in my previous videos, and you can see it's 4. Okay, so it knows how to do addition as well. And to keep with what they're saying about spaces, should put space in between it like that. Okay, so that's that. That is that tutorial. And it's worthy to note that when you put numbers in here without assigning them to a variable, like I did x equals 2 in my last video, that's assigning it to a variable. If you don't assign it to a variable, it's just called hard coding. So we hard coded these 2's into this print statement. Okay, so this is going to start getting into some data, I guess. You check the table to see what's inside. And so this has, for many different countries, what the number of speakers is, whether they're native or if they're total, and then the number of websites that use that language. Does anything stand out to us about these numbers? Well, it's interesting that English makes up 54% of websites, but for example, let's go to Chinese here. Chinese has way more speakers, right? And it only makes up 1% of all web pages, even though they have 3 times as many speakers. So it shows you that America, I guess, has more web pages and more developers and things like that. Okay, so let's see. Calculating data. The first thing you should experience when looking at data professionally is suspicion. Are all the numbers where they need to be? Are there any obvious errors? Is the developer you received it from making any mistakes? See, this is kind of like advanced for even just starting Python. They're already trying to get that in your mind that data you're going to get is going to be bad, but probably not the data they're going to give us. So let's see. Can you calculate the proportion of foreign Japanese speakers to all the Japanese speakers combined. All right, so if we go up here and look for foreign Japanese speakers, so if we go to the Japanese language, it's this column here. Okay, why is that not highlighting? Okay, there we go. Okay, and we want to calculate the proportion of foreign Japanese speakers. So we have native speakers, right? Is 128.2. So foreign would be the total number of speakers minus the native speakers. So we have total here, which is 128.3, and we're subtracting 128.2, and that's kind of the first thing you need to do. So what we've calculated here is the number of foreign speakers. That's all this calculation is doing. And then the proportion to all the Japanese speakers. So then to get the fraction, you then divide that by the total. So here we subtracted the total from the native, the native from the total, and then divided by the total. And that gives us our result. So let's run this. And this is like even just basic math. It's not necessarily programming. So far the only two programming things we've learned is how to print something to the screen, and then also how you can use math and order of operations or numbers to do math in programming. So you can see it's a really small number. So you can see that if you're going to speak Japanese in the world, you're probably going to be a native speaker. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Okay, you can elaborate the meaning behind code by leaving comments. In any language you want to write, it is perfectly fine. Just let Python know that you're writing a comment. In Python, a command starts with a hashtag sign or a pound key, whatever you want to call that. The number of websites in Chinese are in 10 million. See, that's misleading. I don't know why they put this on the second line, because that wouldn't necessarily, if it's on a new line, be a comment. You need to have... oh, I see what's happening is this line actually goes, so if I expand the window out here, it is actually on one line. But so if I wanted to write another comment, you see it for every line that I want to be a comment, one has a hashtag, two has a hashtag. Each of those are on its own line, and that means those are both comments. Okay, so let's see if we can scroll back over here. Python ignores everything that is written after the hashtag. You can turn a line of code that shouldn't be run yet, but it should be deleted. But it shouldn't be deleted either into a comment. Software is called as commenting out. Yeah, so maybe sometimes I'm doing a whole bunch of different calculations and I might need a number later. So for example, I'll go to this notebook over here. Maybe I'm doing, print 2 plus 2, print 5 plus 5, print, 25 times 10. And I print all those to the screen if I run this cell. So it prints all three of them, and I'm like, okay, I don't actually need those right now. I'm just going to comment these two lines out. I want the middle one. That's really the only one I need. And then run that. You can see these top two lines don't actually, or the first line and the last line don't actually run now because they're commented out, whereas the second line runs. So that's might be useful when you need to only do a specific thing at one time. Okay, so yeah, so each line of code in Python ends when you place a string break by pressing the enter key. Yeah, so that's what I was talking about earlier. This, even though this looks like it's two lines, it's not actually, because you haven't pressed enter yet. It's just because the window isn't wide enough to fit it all on one line. Okay, so make calculations as described in the comments and print the result on the screen. So you can notice someone put a comment here, I guess it was Yandex, and they said calculate how many times the number of native Chinese speakers is greater than the number of native English speakers. Print the result on the screen. So if we go back to the chart, which is this languages.csv, we need the number of native Chinese speakers. I think this should be how many times greater the number of native Chinese speakers is. So it's like times. So we go to the native Chinese speakers, which is 908.7, and we divide that by the number of native English speakers. Okay. Number of English speakers is 378.2 million. And so doing this calculation, we get 2.402. So English is the most popular language, although it's most often learned as a foreign language. Cool. Let's take a break. No, we're actually going to finish this whole module so that the next video can be 2. We're still on module number 1. Okay, so variables. So this is kind of like the x equals 2 I did in the last video. Let's see. Code will allow you to save the results of any transitional calculations. In order to save them, we will require variables. The first time you establish the name of a variable is referred to as declaring a variable. In Python, a variable is always declared by assigning a value to it. Just enter the name equals sign followed by the assignment operator and then the desired value. So just like I had x equals 2, they're setting English equal to 378.2. So it's kind of the same thing. If you mention a variable in the program later, the name will be replaced by its value. So after I set x equals 2, I can then do print x, and 2 should be printed out to the screen because it's been assigned to a variable. So you can see they assigned English to 378.2. They print English, and out prints 378.2. You can imagine variables as labeled boxes where we store our values, then we take them out and use them, and afterwards store any new value inside. Only use Latin letters for variable names. Any non-Latin characters could cause errors. So this is, again, just a, something that it might understand it if you don't put a Latin letter, but for me, ease of readability, and so that maybe on a different machine, it'll always compile for me. That's like a rule of thumb. If a name consists of several words, then separate them using an underscore. So spaces, obviously, if you put a space there, it's almost acting like a whole new variable, right? Because it's not the same word anymore. So if you add an underscore, it'll work. Python allows numbers in the variable names, but not in the beginning. So I can't assign a variable as 1 gem, right? Like that's not going to be a valid name, but I can do gem1. That is allowed as a variable name. And the highlighting of whatever editor you're using should help you out with that. You can notice when I did 1 gem, right, it thinks that 1 is a number, and so it's confused when I do gem next to it, and it's like 2 separate things now. Okay, so here they're just assigning some numbers from the table as variables in the code, and they're doing some subtraction statements with it to get the final result. So this challenge is to calculate or create the following variables: English, Russian, German, Chinese. Let's see if I can. And set their values according to the number of native speakers of English, Russian, German, and Chinese. So if I go over here, I look at the native speakers for English, it's 378.2. I go to Russian, it's 153.9. I go to German, it's 76. And I go to Chinese, it's 908.7. And I'm just assigning those to a variable. Okay. Determine if there are more native Chinese speakers or native speakers of the top 3 most popular online languages combined. Okay, so what they want us to do is make a new variable and add all the variables that aren't Chinese together, and then subtract that total from the Chinese to see which one's bigger. And so what we're doing is we're adding English, Russian, and German together, which is basically all that's going to do is add 378.2 plus 153.9 plus 76 together, and potentially you could just run that command itself. So let me just copy and paste this into the notebook we have working over here. So if I insert a new cell below, and paste this in here, and then we want to print actually what this top 3 total is. And I hit Shift Enter to run it. It says 608.1. So you can see those are the ones that aren't Chinese added together. And so if we go back here, we can imagine 908.7 minus 608.1 is going to be somewhere around 300. So let's go over here and run it. Again, I don't think I can have this notification here when I run it. So yeah, it's somewhere around 300.6, and that's the answer. So now I do number 10. Follow the variable naming rule in order to make sure other developers will be able to comprehend your code. According to the variable name, it should be obvious what's stored inside. Try and avoid names like A and B. Yeah, so when I did x equals 2, that's probably a bad name, right? Because you don't know what x actually is. You should have set it to um, the number of fingers I'm holding up. That could be a variable name because maybe it's 2, right? So, for example, a variable used for storing the number of native English speakers should be named English native rather than just English. Certain values in the table may change and you may need to update your data later. That's when understandable variable names will shine. Let's calculate how many times greater the number of websites in English are to the number of websites in Russian. So they divided English by Russian and got 8.83. And then they divided a proportion and got 9.918. Okay, so now they want us to find out how many times more sites there are in Chinese than in Japanese. The program divides the number of Chinese websites by the number of Japanese websites with values taken from 2018. Fill in the variables with values from 2013. What conclusion can be made from the results? So we go back into here and we go into the number of websites in the top 10 million. We go to Japanese. We see 0.034. And Chinese is 0.017. Okay. Let's go back to what it's asking. Okay, so here they give you the 2013 value, 0.045, so that's what we're storing there, and then 0.043, and then we just divide those two. By the way, these are filled out already because I went through this before the video. For the next video, I won't do that. I was just kind of making sure that I understood how this was going to look when I did the video. Okay. So here we go. Now we're going to start talking about types. So there are a few different, number types, right? You can have an integer, which has no decimal point at the end of it, or you can have a float, which is, a decimal that has like maybe 2 or 3 numbers after the decimal point. And you can have something called a double, which has a lot of decimal places out at the end of it. And it just has to go with kind of the binary representation of the number in memory. Either you make that number completely, it can be really big if you don't have to have decimals because, some of that spot is taken up by the numbers after the decimal, or it can have decimals and be a little bit smaller. So let's see. If we read the description here, any value that we use is related to a specific data type. For example, an integer. In Python, this type of data is called an int. An int type is stored in the English variable. So you can see here there's no decimal point here, so that's why it's an integer. In order to confirm the data type, call the type function and pass the name of the variable as an argument. So after you assign English to that big 10,000 or this big number here, you can print it out and it'll tell you that it's class int. Okay. The result of the type function is the class int, which tells us the past argument's data type is integer. In such situations, programmers say type refers to the returns a value of class int. Fractions have a different data type referred to as float. The name comes from the term floating point, which we'll talk more about in a bit. We print the 6 has no decimal point, so the type is int. 6.0 has a decimal point at the end of it, so that's why it's a float. A floating point or floating commas differentiate decimals from whole numbers. They float moving left or right depending on the factor of 10 being used. Okay. So what type of data is the Russian web share? So you can see it has a decimal, so that one's going to be float. What type is web popular? It's going to be an integer. And so then what they're going to do is, okay, well, what happens if we multiply a float times an integer? And the result is that you're going to get a float output. And that's just kind of how Python decided to do it. So if we run this code, you're going to see that it has a decimal point and it's a float type. Okay. Now that you've learned about a particular behavior of variables, multiplying int and float types values produces a float type value, even if the result should have been an integer. You can fix that, is what they're probably going to say. Python does not understand the meaning of the code and cannot determine on its own whether the result should be an integer or fraction. So the operation with an integer and float types together produces a float type, so that not a single digit will be lost. If the float type doesn't suit us, then we can perform a type conversion in order to convert our float type integer into an integer type. This is done by calling the integer function. Okay, please note that when the float is converted to int, the end result is rounded down, meaning that decimal places after the period will be ignored. So that's very important. So like if you divide, let's see, 5 by 2, you're normally going to get 2.5, right? And so normally if you rounded that, you'd probably say it was 3. Well, it doesn't round up. It rounds down every time. Even if it's like 2.9, it'll go back down to 2. So that's just interesting when you cast it via integer. And then you can also cast an integer to float by calling the float function, okay? So we've written code that converts the number of Russian speakers given in the millions to the total number of native Russian speakers. The variable Russian native is now classified as float data, but because it's storing a number of people, it's better to be converted to an integer type. Now add that conversion sequence to the code. So all we had to do was cast integer here on this decimal point number times an integer, and that will turn into an integer. And so if we run this code, you can see it's an integer now. Okay, so let's go next. Okay, errors. Mistakes can happen all the time. Each professional developer can make a mistake, therefore it's important to understand these mistakes and how to correct them. So you try and run this code here, and you can notice it's Russian speakers is the first variable, but here it's trying to print Russian speckers, which was not what was defined. So you're getting an error that says Russian speckers is not defined. Here we've made a typo in the second line. Python encounters an unknown variable name and returns an error message. It provides us with some helpful details that it's on line 2. It's a name error, and the cause of the error is Russian speckers is not defined. In order to make the program work, let's correct the typo, and then it works fine. Some other errors that you might find is a syntax error, where you have 3 plus something. It's expecting something to be added to it on the right-hand side, but there's nothing else there. So that's why that's an error. You need a number there. The invalid syntax message means that an error was made in the syntax. You will encounter this type of error when you forget to insert a parentheses or a quotation mark. Unexpected end of file while parsing. The end of file in the error message stands for end of file. Python has detected that the beginning of the function call was never completed. So you have hello, but you forgot a quotation mark here, and so that's why it's not able to finish the command. The end of EOL in the error message stands for end of line. Python has detected that the opening quotation mark was the opening quotation mark without a closing one. Okay, so in this assignment, we're going to play with the various errors, conceal the lines containing the incorrect code one by one with a hash sign, and error messages are returned by Python and not our interactive platform. Once you've had enough time playing with these errors, remove the entire code and then check the box. So yeah, so this is just showing me what they did in the, so if I hit play here, you'll have an error because 3 plus whatever, there's nothing, so we can delete that line. Can run again. Now hello has no quotation mark at the end of it, so we can get rid of that. Hit play. End of file while parsing, there's no parenthesis here that's missing for this print statement, so we get rid of that. and now doesn't know what Russian speckers is because it's actually supposed to be speakers. So we delete all that, we hit play, it should let us go to the next. Okay, we hit check. Online and offline languages. If there are several values in the source data table, make sure to store each of them individually inside a variable that's assigned to an easy to remember name. That will make calculations within the program easier to understand and double check. Now let's apply what we've learned before and compare how languages are used both online and offline. We are interested in 3 main languages: Chinese, English, and Russian. We'll calculate the percentage of speakers of each language and the percentage of websites written in that language, and will determine the web popularity index by dividing the number of popular websites in a given language by the number of people who speak it. Create the following variables by taking the values you need from the table. For a second. But we're back to this, what we're supposed to do here. What it wants us to do is create following variables from the table, get the Chinese speakers for the number of people who speak Chinese, the web share, and then do it for the other 3. So if you go to the languages over here, we go to Chinese speakers. Let's go. We see that this is the native speakers, and this is the total here, 1107, and then the web share is just the 0.017. And so then I just copied, which is, I'm using Command C on Mac. On Windows it's Control C. I copy these 2 lines and then paste it with Control V or Command V on Mac, and then just change it to English. So if I go over here to the English, I can see this is again native, this is total 1121, and then 0.539, and then I did the same thing for Russian. If we go to Russian over here, we get 264.3 and then 0.061, and all it wants us to do is store it in variables. It doesn't want us to print anything. So if you run that, there will be nothing in your output, but it actually has the variable stored, and so it said that's fine. So let's go to the next one. Okay, printing values on the same line. So now that we know how to print text, you can also print text next to each other or next to variables on the same line. So it says enter the proportion of people who speak Chinese and assign this value to Chinese speaker share in the following format. So it wants us to print share of people who speak Chinese colon and then put a comma, which is, if we scroll down here, that's how they're saying that you can do multiple things on the same line. Is you just add a comma and then add another variable or a quotation mark sequence, and then put another comma, and then so on. Commas can be used to list as many parts of the message as you like. There's no limits to the number of arguments you can provide to the print function. And that's all they give you for this. And so then it wants us to do the same thing for Chinese. So if we go up here, the Chinese speaker share is going to be the number of Chinese speakers, which is 1107, divided by the total number of speakers, which is 7539. So if we do that division and then print, or see, we're printing the share of people who speak Chinese, comma, and then the Chinese speaker share. And then we do English speaker shares, the English speakers divided by the total speakers. And we changed Chinese here to English. We also need to change this variable here from Chinese to English speaker share. Then we do Russian speaker share. So we do number of Russian speakers divided by total speakers, share of people who speak Russian. We need to change this variable to Russian speaker share. Okay, and if we hit play on that, we should get all 3 lines. Okay, so you can see Chinese and English are pretty close, 15%-ish. Hit check. It says that's correct. Okay, so you go on the next one. The format function. So the numbers don't look neat enough quite yet. What's up with the long decimals? This is what I was talking about earlier, because depending on which number format you use, whether it's float or double, you could have lots of decimal places or not as many. Sure, we're talking about the population of the planet here, but we don't need to be dead on. In the previous lesson we have obtained the following results: 0.146836, so the very long decimals. Now let's present these numbers again by using percentages. The format function will help us accomplish that. This function is called in a particular way. For example, print, and you can see it's called on this string. This string can be called dot format on, and then you also note that it has two brackets here as well. That's like where the number is actually going to go in at. Okay, so let's break this code down into sections. We first need to create a template for the line that we'd like to print where each number is placed with curly braces. Then we have to type a period and write the word format in the parentheses of the format function. We must pass the arguments, in particular the number of arguments we're trying to send. As long as the curly braces are empty, the number printed will be the same as the one stored in the variable. However, you can specify an output template in these curly braces. For example, indicate the desired number of decimal places. So when you do that, you see they're adding the brackets, and then inside the brackets they're doing :.2f, which should have 2 decimal places. Yep, 0.54 has 2 decimal places. Or they say digits. The letter F stands for fixed, and means that the number should be displayed as a decimal with a fixed point. If you put a % sign at the end of format, we'll display the number as a percentage. 53.9%. Okay, so it wants us to create a variable called Chinese native. Let's do Chinese native. Using the number of native Chinese speakers, and print this value on the screen as Chinese is the native language for blank million people. Call the format function without specifying any parameters. Okay, so Chinese natives, the number is 908.7. Okay, and then we do, what else? Okay, so now we're going to print this. So we do print Chinese is the native language for, and then we put the brackets like we saw before, million people. Okay, and then we do dot format, and then put the variable we want, which is Chinese native. Okay. So now we can run the program, see if it prints out correctly. Yep, it looks right. So we hit check. Yeah. Okay, cool. So now let's return to the task we began with, calculating the proportion of the world's population speaks different languages. Print the proportion, not a percentage for now, of people who speak Chinese on the screen with the following text. Okay, so share of people who speak Chinese, colon space, bracket, colon, 2f. I think it's 0.2f, right? Then dot format, Chinese speakers share. Okay, so let's see if we did that correctly by hitting play. Looks about right. It's 2 decimal places, 0.15, so we hit check. That's great. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Now let's add the percentages for the rest of the languages. Your results should look like this. 14.7%. Oh, it's going to make us write it all over again. Okay, so luckily if you're in your Kaggle notebook or in your Jupyter notebook, you shouldn't have to delete anything. It should already be there. But so what did we do? We did Chinese speakers divided by total speakers. Okay. And so now we do percentage of people who speak Chinese, colon, space. We need the, what they say, use percent to. Let's look back at what they said. Yeah. Dot, so it's, again, you have to put a colon, dot, 2%. It's interesting though, they only have, we'll see what it looks like. So we do this, and then dot format Chinese underscore speakers share. We hit play, see what that looks like. But see, we're supposed to have 14.7, so I think there's only supposed to be one decimal place here. So let's do play again. Yep, 14.7. So we can copy paste. Command C, Command V. We want to do English. Percentage of people who speak English. Then change the variable from Chinese to English. Okay, and then we need it one more time for the Russians. For Mother Russia. Do Russian speakers share. Russian speakers divided by total speakers, people who speak Russian. Format. Russian speakers share. Okay, so we hit play. Let's see what that looks like. Looks about right. We'll check it. And that's correct. So let's go to the next one. Writing text. Now the time has come to learn how to separate sentences into lines, some of which can be empty like in actual tables. In order to avoid writing in every single line, now let's divide the program's output into individual blocks for each of the language. Your results should look like this: Chinese, English, Russian. The more properties of the print function that you haven't learned yet will be very important here. First, each call to this function will start printing on a new line. This sentence is separated into several lines. Second, an empty line is printed if you call the print function without any arguments. Okay, so he's writing a poem, or he or she is writing a poem. Okay, so add a header to each block with the language name as well as an empty line following each language. Okay, so it wants us to print dash 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 space Chinese space dash dash dash, and then on the next line it wants to do percentage of speakers okay, and then it wants a blank line, so we do print and then put nothing in there. And then it wants us to do English, so we can do print dash 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 space English space dash 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 percentage of speakers okay, and then it wants another blank line, so we do print, then put a space, and then we can do Russian speakers. Again, delete this real quick and just put speakers. Okay, and it wants print dash 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 space Russian dash 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 percentage of speakers. Okay, so let's play that and see if that's correct. So I have an error somewhere. Let's see. Names Chinese speakers part is not defined. Oh, it's not part, it's share. Hit play. That looks about right, so we'll check it. That's correct. Let's go next. 18. Armed with our print and format functions, let's now present the results of our study. We finally have something special to present. We're going to determine each language's web popularity index. For starters, add the information on the proportion of sites in each language to each individual block. Print the percentage to the 1 decimal place. The output should look like this. Percentage of speakers, percentage of websites in the language. Okay, so we want to add a line in between the space, so we put it here. Percentage of websites in the language, colon space, then we need to put our bracket formatting again, and this time it says to 2 decimal places. Nope, to print the percentage to 1 decimal place. Okay, so .1f .format. Then we put Chinese web share, right? We already defined that up there above. Chinese web share. Okay, and we're going to copy this so we can put it for English and Russian. Command C. Command V. Percentage of websites in the language, and then instead of Chinese, we put English here. English web share. And we have Russian. So we press enter, paste. Percentage of websites in the language, Russian web share. Okay, and then we hit play and see how that looks. Awesome. So let's check that. Incorrect output. So I'm missing something, guys. Let's see. Guys and gals. So we have percentage of... Oh, it's supposed to be percentage, isn't it? I forgot the percent sign. Not 1F. 1%. Okay, let's see if that fixes it. We'll check again. Correct, awesome. Task 2. Now fill in each one of the blocks with the information on our web popularity index. Then divide the number of sites in each language by the number of people who speak it. To clean things up, multiply the result by 1,000 and display the result to 2 decimal places. Okay, so we need to add the web popularity index. So this, you can probably do this on multiple lines, or you can do this on one line. I'm going to probably calculate the web popularity index first. So if we do, actually I probably will add it up here before we start printing. So I'm going to do Chinese popularity index is going to be equal to, let's see what their formula is for that. Fill in each one of the blocks with information on our web popularity index. Trying to see if I remember what the web popularity index, how we were supposed to calculate that. Let's see. Divide the number of sites in each language by the number of people who speak it. So the number of websites is Chinese websites divided by the number of people who speak it. So Chinese speakers. Okay. To clean things up, multiply the result by 1,000. So we'll take this times 1,000. Okay, so that should be all we need there. And then it says when we print it out, it wants it to print it out with print web popularity index :space bracket dot 1%. It says no, to 2 decimal place dot 2%. Okay, dot format, and then we put Chinese underscore popularity underscore index. Okay, I think that looks right. So we'll play just to see if the Chinese one looks right. Okay, I think that looks okay. Now we'll copy also spaces here. That's Chinese, so now I'll do English. Oh, you know, they did the calculation for us up here. I should have looked at that, shouldn't I? Now I feel silly. They're doing the exact same calculation I did here up here. Okay, but we still have to do it down here though. So let's see. So I'll just skip the one I did and just use there too. So I do Command V here. English websites is going to be equal to English web share. Is that already up here? Let's see. Yep, English web share is given. Times total web, and then English index. I honestly think their variable could be better. They could have had popularity in there, because what kind of index is it? You know, if they're going to be teaching us all this, they should be using. Okay, then we should be able to just copy paste here. Web popularity index English. And it's not popularity index up because we're using theirs now. It's just English index. Okay, and then we do the same thing for Russia. We do Russian index, Russian websites, Russian speakers. Okay, and then the printing it out again, just the copy paste again, change English to Russian. Let's play and see how that looks. Wow, there's ones that are over 100%. That might be wrong. Let's see. Incorrect output format. Let's see. Web popularity index colons. Maybe it's in the Chinese one I did. Let's use their index instead. Chinese index. It's the same thing. Okay. Multiply the result by 1,000. Print to 2 decimal places. Oh, it's not supposed to be a percentage. It should be a index should just be the F version, right? So let's see if that works. That's correct. Awesome. And we're done, right? It just has this conclusion here. Things we learn from the data. Python can do so much more. It truly prevails when you need to process large amounts of data. We're going to take a look at these in the following chapter. Then lists are what we're going to look at in the next chapter. Then we'll learn how to process lists using loops so that we have more time to do what we love, creating and testing hypothesis, and the first hypothesis waiting for you at the beginning of the next chapter. Okay, awesome. So that's the end of this video, guys, and we'll see what chapter 2 holds next time. Thank you so much for watching.